Yes. So one of the most successful parts we thought of the regional or the workshops that we had were the presentations by, we had 2 state agencies present, all did fantastic jobs giving us a summary of their research program. So we wanted to kind of set the stage with this, with 2 agencies who presented during the workshops. Some of you may have seen these individuals in the workshop you attended. Some of you may not. I guess there's a 1/4 chance that you've seen one of them at least. So the first one is George Schischler with the Colorado Wildlife and Parks. And George, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so can everyone hear me? And I assume that everybody can see my presentation at the moment. I get some kind of reaction or some acknowledgement there that
You're good, George.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. Okay, so thanks everybody. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I'm going to go ahead and give you a little rundown of our aquatic research program in Colorado. I think on the agenda, the title was something to the effect of, this is the development of a kind of the best possible research program or an ideal research program. And that may be a bit of an overstatement. I think we're doing as well as we can relative to what we have had in the past over the course of our history. Something that works for us anyway in Colorado. We've actually had a research section or aquatic research program in Colorado since 1945. And over the course of its history, we feel that our research program has led the way on many subjects throughout history. So let's just get into it here. Our research section is fairly well known for the productivity and effectiveness we have in generating high quality scientific research, mainly to inform management activities. The projects we conduct are specifically designed to answer questions posed by our aquatic biologists. We currently have over 80 ongoing aquatic research projects in the state, and those can range in scale and in topics as well, range from native cutthroat trout taxonomy to aquatic invertebrate metals contamination. And in addition to conducting research projects, our aquatic research section is also responsible for many operational functions, such as stream habitat implementation, management of aquatic databases, and assisting with basic hatchery and aquatic management functions. And we also do a lot of contract administration as well in our section. So an important component of our research section's success has been the focus on addressing relevant scientific questions that have direct applicability to management actions. We see our section as a service unit whose job is to provide strong scientific support to the agency decision-making process. Both our capability and response time to answer management questions have garnered support within the agency by our higher level administrators. And that support has changed from weak to strong throughout our history, in large part due to the efficiency of the section, as well due to the communication of our findings in ways that are understandable and actionable by aquatic biologists and managers. Our aquatic research section consists of 15 staff members, including a research leader, an administrative assistant, 10 research scientists, and 3 research hatchery staff. Most of our staff have PhDs or Master of Science degrees, and even our administrative assistant has a Bachelor of Science in Fisheries. Each of our research scientists and staff members have these specific areas of expertise that go along with their job duties. I have photos of all of our staff scattered throughout this presentation, and really the core effectiveness of our program depends on the high quality staff we have and their and their authority in their specific fields of study. So to understand our prioritization process, it's important to understand our agency structure. This graphic is the top layer of Colorado Parks and Wildlife. That includes our regional managers who are in charge of our 4 regions throughout the state. That's where our district wildlife managers, also known as game wardens, and park managers reside in the chain of command. We also have an aquatics, terrestrial, and natural resources branch that's on the far right of the slide. That's where our aquatic section proper resides. That's where our aquatic biologists, our hatcheries, and our other aquatic section functions occur. Now, the Aquatic Research Section, in contrast, in Colorado, has been housed both inside and outside of that aquatic section over the years, depending on our agency structure at the time. During our last reorganization about 10 years ago, we were moved out into a separate branch, and on this chart, it's adjacent to that aquatics and terrestrial and natural resources branch in the chart in yellow there, into a separate branch called Research Policy and Planning. So just to take a little closer look at these 2 branches, as I mentioned, the Research Policy and Planning branch is in the yellow here. We have a GIS unit, mammals, avian, and aquatic research groups under that. And under the Aquatic Research Section are the personnel I showed in the previous slide, and each of our research personnel have specialized area of expertise. Now, in the adjacent Aquatic Terrestrial Natural Resources branch, we have the aquatic section, the water unit, and the terrestrial section. Under aquatics is the hatcheries, our aquatic animal health lab that conducts all of diagnostics, and all of our aquatic biologists, ANS, and aquatic nuisance species work. So kind of what Andy was talking about before was this whole idea of stovepiping or silos. A scenario like this has a lot of opportunity for silos or stovepiping without adequate communication between those branches. So if we want to get even more refined here and drill down into the chart with respect to our groups in our aquatic research section, again, we have our research personnel here on the left of the slide, and primarily the aquatic section on the right, as well as the water unit, which handles things like water rights and stream flow and water quality regulations. So you'll notice under the aquatic biologist cell there, we have our aquatic biologists broken into regions, similar to the regions described for our game wardens and park managers. Each of those regions has a senior aquatic biologist and 6 to 7 area biologists. And those responsibilities for those biologists are segregated geographically throughout the state, as opposed to our research staff that have specific areas of expertise. So these aquatic biologists are responsible for setting regulations, setting stocking schedules, and fisheries monitoring and inventory work in their areas. So the interactions between our aquatic research section and those other units are key in our research project prioritization process. So I've shown here with some of the arrows here, those relationships between the various groups. For instance, the hatcheries are in regular contact with our aquatic research hatchery, our aquatic toxicology lab, and our disease researcher. So a constant dialogue is ongoing between the area biologists in each of those 4 regions and our research scientists related to their topics of expertise. Our research scientists regularly assist with your standard monitoring, inventory, or reclamation work, and those open lines of dialogue and engagement are expected at this level. So in addition to the on-the-ground interactions, we have what we call our aquatic senior staff that consists of the lead individual in each of these cells that are highlighted in green here. So this includes our aquatic program manager, our hatchery chief, our fish health manager, the aquatic senior biologist, ANS coordinator, and the native species coordinator, and myself in charge of the aquatic research section. So we have meetings generally once every 1 or 2 months, and we discuss and coordinate the aquatic operations. And research is always on the agenda, and this open dialogue, again, helps identify ongoing or upcoming issues that may require research answers or involvement. So now into the detail of how we approach research prioritization. This really gets into the nuts and bolts of how we operate. At one time, we had more of a top-down approach where the research priorities were set forth in our strategic plan, and they were renewed once every 5 to 7 years. And a lot of effort was put into planning those very long-term research projects and goals. And there was, considerable debate and detail put into these plans. The trouble is the pace at which priorities can change can result in a disconnect between those long-term strategies and specific research study implementation under that scenario. So what happens is oftentimes projects become obsolete long before their completion. So over time, our strategic plans became less specific at defining research goals and having this hard set direction. But that left us with sort of no direct guidance. And from the standpoint of a research leader, that's great because the goals and objectives are very general. And that allowed us substantial flexibility in our project selection. The problem is, though, in a scenario like that without proper planning, the initiation of these new projects did not always result in management questions being directly addressed. So over the last 15 years or so, we've developed more of a bottom-up or hybrid approach where the needs directly from the field play a large role in research project selection. This is beneficial because the overarching goals of the agency can be met without mandating or being locked into long-term specific projects that may not be relevant as other emerging issues. And the direct input from the field helps guide those priorities. So now on to the detail of how we approach the research prioritization. Really the scope and complexity as well as the funding availability and urgency of the project determine the selection process. However, in general, we can divide our research involvement into 3 different categories. Those are either consultations, minor projects, or major projects. So the first category is what we call consultations or technical assistance. These are routine functions of our staff experts. They are prioritized and conducted by individual research scientists and direct interaction with other staff. So that includes, site visits and technical assistance, information transfer based on existing reports or staff knowledge, literature reviews and summaries, and management recommendations come from those. So no additional funding and minor staff time are generally required for these sorts of endeavors. The next category is minor projects. These are prioritized and conducted by individual research scientists and direct interactions with other staff. The approval for these projects is required by the research leader and the collaborator supervisor, such as the senior biologist for the area or the hatchery chief. And these can be modifications of an typical ongoing survey and monitoring work or other standard procedures. These would be projects that have limited effect on existing operation budgets and impact on staff time. The last category is major projects. This is more what you think about when you're thinking about these, big endeavors statewide. Calls for a major project prioritization would be cases where we are hiring new staff or an existing researcher completes an existing major project. Availability of funds or large-scale unexpected major statewide concerns generate an immediate need. Those are the sorts of things that would trigger a major project. These sorts of projects are prioritized by actual polling of area biologists and other aquatic staff. Our aquatic senior staff input is required to set the final priorities, and that's best described as a committee decision. And so if you'll recall the slide I had earlier of the cells in green there, we have usually about 8 people that are involved in that final committee decision. So these are large projects that would have an effect on existing operations budgets and a large impact on state staff time. So specifically for these major projects, our research scientists are expected to have an ongoing dialogue with area biologists on upcoming needs. So with that ongoing dialogue, then they always have sort of a list of projects in hand. And so when a researcher completes a major project and will be assigned a new one, some of those new projects will already be ready to go. Upon receipt of the priorities from each of the biologists, the aquatic researcher then aggregates those priorities and they rank them based on an average of the selection from all of the biologists. So the highest priority projects are discussed during senior staff meetings, as I described, to consider the needs at the area, regional, and statewide level to finalize those rankings. Because most of the projects are a collaborative effort between the biologists and research scientists, funding obligations towards the project as well as other personnel and timing considerations are discussed as part of the decision-making process. And a consensus vote among the aquatic senior staff members sets the highest priorities, and then the aquatic research leader directs the appropriate research scientist to proceed with the project. In some cases, when funding is available but staff time or expertise is not adequate to address certain issues, we do bring in collaborators such as university faculty members to be contracted to assist in implementing projects. So that's in a nutshell our prioritization process. We do have another critical component, I think, of our research process, and that is project reporting. Peer-reviewed publications, internal technical reports, and fact sheets are designed to formally provide the results of these studies to all agency staff. Annual reports are a requirement for all major projects and most minor projects, and peer-reviewed publications are expected for each major project. Presentations in public and professional forums are required, such as our aquatic senior staff meetings, annual aquatic biologist meetings, and AFS meetings, as well as CPW area meetings to get that information to the local level. So in summary, the success of our research program depends on agency leadership support, specifically defined roles and responsibility of research scientists that match up with their areas of expertise, direct and meaningful dialogue between biologists and research scientists, and effective communication of results to inform biologists as how those results can be used for management actions. And then finally, I've also added a few aspirational goals here, for these are areas where I feel we can improve our program. That includes more interactions with other states and prioritizing, planning, and collaboration, greater in-house capability to reduce the need for contract administration to outside entities. And finally, probably what we all want is additional access to upper levels of government leadership to provide perspective on the value of research functions. So with that, that is the end of my presentation. I hope you were all able to hear that, and if you have any questions, I can answer them.
Mike, if you have any.
Hey, George, it's Jim Fredericks. Good to see you virtually. As I watched your presentation, my assumption that this is all DJ or discretionary research funding, and maybe that's mostly all that Colorado has. If there are other research programs that are tied more to mitigation of specific contracts, how do you fit those in with the research program? Is it the same cast of characters, or are those more just separate?
You know, we used to be exclusively on DJ money in aquatic research, and we were moved out of DJ money about 3 years ago, and so but to your point, yeah, there was a dedicated funding stream that we could pretty reliably on. That became more of just our base budget, and so when you talk about additional funds, we have another fund called Species Conservation Trust Fund dollars, and that's more of like, you know, lump funding that comes in, and it is a little bit faster track, but we still use the same prioritization process with the same individuals involved. So maybe if it's a more urgent scenario, decisions are made faster within the aquatic senior staff level to direct researchers specifically to, you know, assign them specifically to tasks to handle those emerging issues when that additional funding becomes available.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Hi, George. This is Gary Whalen from Michigan DNR. And my question is, do you encourage your staff to look for external funding sources? And if so, how does that fit into your prioritization system?
You know, we typically have, at least in recent years, had such a workload and available like base funds that we haven't actively sought out additional funding. In the past, when things were much leaner, we would actively go out and try to search for funds, but they would generally be projects that were already sort of on that priority list that was developed with the biologists. So we would try to identify, say for instance, a grant opportunity that would match well with something that was already, being asked for from the biologists. More recently, it's become more difficult for us to search for outside grant funding because our budgeting office wants to know where we're applying for funding before we even send out an application, and so it slows the whole grant seeking opportunity side down a little bit. But generally, if we were going for outside grants, we would try to make sure that it fell within something that was already requested as a project.
Hey, George, this is Jim Hasbrook. I'm wondering, in your third to last slide or so, where you had the priority ratings of different people, for some of those projects or research ideas, there was quite a discrepancy. One person rated it high priority, one rated it low priority. It wasn't quick enough to do the math. It looked like maybe the rank ended up being an average. So is that what you do? You just take an average as opposed to some other way to prioritize when people think a project has low priority versus somebody else who thinks it's high priority? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Typically what we do is, at least for the stage where the biologists are involved, that is entirely an average of those rankings by the biologists. And, as you mentioned, one thing might be a priority to one person and certainly not to another, depending on, for instance, the area of the state that they're in. And so we've got, area biologists. I think we have about 26 area biologists scattered throughout the state. And so, somebody on the Eastern Plains may not have nearly the same perception as somebody that's, up on top of the Continental Divide as far as research priorities. And so generally at that stage, it's completely an average. But, it does tend to work out because the more individuals that find in a certain subject matter a priority will kind of push that scale one direction or another. And so we feel that we're addressing the largest need statewide. Now, that's not to say that exceptions may be made for that. Sometimes there's a localized issue that has the potential to become a very large statewide issue. And if that's recognized at the senior staff level, then we may move that to a higher level of priority.
Okay, I think we had one more question, then we'll move on.
Say, George, this is Doug Austin. You have a lot of internal capacity for research, which is somewhat unique amongst the states, but you also have a powerful unit, Colorado State. How and when do you interact with them, and how does that relationship fit in with the research programs that you guys do?
So, yeah, we do have a pretty strong relationship with Colorado State University. They're housed right here in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is where our main hub for aquatic research is as well for the state. And so we'll oftentimes collaborate on projects depending on the scale and the subject matter material. So it just depends on the, if we've got a professor over at CSU that has a lot of experience doing things like, say, for instance, Dana Winkleman with endocrine disruptors at CSU, then he's the obvious person to contract with a project to work on that. And so, but we work a lot with a co-op unit there with Dana and with many of the other professors. It's not 100% of the time, but a large proportion of the graduate students that we run go through CSU.
Okay. Thank you very much, George.